Hello and welcome to episode 82 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Robin Ficker, former delegate from District 15 in Montgomery County, currently a defense attorney, and the author of the successful term limit proposal, which received 70% of the vote in November 2016. Robin, how are you doing?
It's a pleasure to be here with you. I was fighting that traffic all the way down on I-270. I don't see why the governor wouldn't take that $800 million he's talking about spending to replace the nice bridge down in Charles County and instead spend that on I-270 where it will benefit even more people.
So we're going to talk about that in just a moment, and the first question I'd like to ask you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Well, I got this term limits question on the ballot, which will bring about fresh ideas because now 5 of the 10 elected members of the Montgomery County government will not be able to run for re-election, so we're going to have some open seats. We're going to have a robust discussion in 2018 and fresh ideas. Maybe we can get some computer geeks on the council, some people who bring in jobs to Montgomery County and improve I-270.
So how did you get the idea to introduce term limits to the Montgomery County Council?
Well, it had passed in various places around the country, and it led to an influx of minorities, women office holders, and fresh ideas all around. We don't need a bevy of Strom Thurmond-like office holders in Montgomery County. Things are moving too fast. You realize Facebook was founded in 2004. Look how fast things are moving.
Yeah, so in 12 years, it's actually become one of the largest companies in America or in the world.
And also my largest stock holding, which has done very well.
So I'd like to just go back a little bit in time to the beginning. You were a delegate. When were you a delegate? When were you first elected?
I was a delegate from 78 to 82, and at that time I was the only Republican on the ballot for any office in District 15 who won. At that time, the office holders in Montgomery County were actually trying to put the county garbage dump right where we have the Avenel golf course now. Imagine what a bad idea that was. And then shortly thereafter, they tried to trench sewage sludge in the residential areas of Montgomery County, and kids were walking home and with their pets and had all kinds of bad things on their shoes into the house.
Wow, so is that what originally got you interested in public service through elected office?
No, because my dad worked for 40 years in the Congressional Research Service in the Library of Congress, and he would bring home the congressional record, which at that time wasn't online, it was printed, and he'd show me a speech given by a senator on the side of a subject that he had written, and then he'd show me another speech on the opposite side of the same subject given by another senator, and he'd written that speech also. So I used to hang around the Library of Congress all the time.
That seems pretty exciting to see your father come home and say, not only is something I've written in the congressional record, but it's on both sides of the issues.
It's both sides of the issue because there's always more than one side to a political problem. I used to know all the nooks and crannies of the Library of Congress, and he would bring me home 6 books every week to read, and by the time I got out of elementary school, I'd already visited all the countries in the world, met all the famous people, knew many of the well-known animals without even leaving my home, simply by reading.
Yeah, so you developed a lifelong love of learning. And how did you, when you saw your father actually taking positions or offering other individuals positions that were different on the same issue, how was it that you eventually found your own political identity and came to a decision, look, I'm going to run as a Republican, I'm going to run on these, transit issues, I'm going to run on, the preventing the dump from being where Avenel is now. How did you determine what your issues were and how your political identity would develop?
Well, because I think that it started in when I was at Montgomery Blair High School and on the football team there, and one of our teammates, Reds Pryor, wasn't allowed to get into the pool at Glen Echo, and so some of us went up and picketed there at Glen Echo so that he would be, he was an African American, so he would be allowed into the pool. And I just realized that everyone has rights and everyone's important. We have to represent everybody. And I became also, was appointed by Rosa Parks and a couple of, and Aaron Henry and Jacqueline Jackson to be the first general counsel for the National Caucus on the Black Aged. And we learned there that as you represent the least of these, you represent the rest of these, so you have to give everyone a fair shot. And I've been a defense attorney for 40 years, representing people who oftentimes have no friends, who are being prosecuted by the state, and who indeed have a story to tell, and who many times have been falsely accused.
Interesting. So you met Rosa Parks, and
Yes.
she appointed you.
Yes, she was on the board of the National Caucus of the Black Aged, and I was appointed by her to be the first general counsel, and that was a thrill because we had a conference where at least 6 presidential candidates attended.
Huh, interesting. So just it's striking me as interesting. So why did she choose you? I mean, clearly you're not an African American individual, and they were interested in advancing African American individuals by having a Caucasian attorney. Do you think that had anything to play, since it was primarily a racial issue, or did it have absolutely nothing to do with it?
Well, actually, I am African American. Both my parents were born in Africa, although I am Caucasian. But she was impressed, I suppose, by my resume, which included degrees in engineering, law, and public administration. So she thought I was well prepared, and they needed a strong advocate to advance the cause of those who were being underrepresented.
And why were you attracted to telling these stories and advocating for these individuals who are being charged by the state? How is it that you originally decided to become a defense attorney?
Well, when you realize that there's a presumption of innocence and people are presumed innocent instead of being presumed guilty, it's attractive to you. People oftentimes criticize me for taking controversial cases. Just recently I had a case where a young African-American girl in Hagerstown was maced 4 times while in a police car, shoved into a concrete windowsill by the police, beaten up by the police after she had been knocked unconscious in a traffic accident. A car ran into her bike. And then you realize that people like that need help, need representation. Their cause is just and needs to be pursued.
There's a long tradition of that. Even listening to the biography of John Adams, you find that he took on defense cases that were unpopular and later had a political career.
Well, he did. And I remember after I got my degree in engineering, I was really thinking about what I wanted to do, and I decided to apply to law school. And one of the essays we had to write to the University of Pennsylvania was explain why you want to go to law school. And I was thinking, well, I really don't know why I want to go to law school. I'm not sure what I want to do. And I went down to the Library of Congress, of course, where my dad worked, and looked up essays that famous attorneys, famous Supreme Court justices had written themselves when they applied to law school. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, the theme of his essay was he went to law school because he didn't know what he wanted to do, and law school was the best place to figure that out. I said, there's my theme. So in essence, I copied his theme, although not his essay, and was successful in being admitted.
Interesting. So let's go back to politics for a little bit. You were a delegate for one term, and you said you had a few issues that you were running on in particular. And then, kind of what were you able to accomplish, and what have you been doing since then?
Well, keep in mind that when I was in the Maryland legislature, there were 141 delegates and only 15 Republicans. Ben Cardin was the speaker, and I became quite knowledgeable about the rules, the procedural rules, And the way to oftentimes act when you're in such a small minority is to get the majority to follow their own rules. So that's what I tried to do. And I remembered I also introduced for the first time a resolution to require that fiscal notes be attached to all legislation before the House, on the floor of the House, because oftentimes before that they were just passing bills without even talking about the cost of the legislation. We have to be fiscally responsible, and that's what I like about the present state here in Montgomery County. I think there's a call for the county to be fiscally responsible. In 2008, I collected the signatures to place a question on the ballot which was opposed by all the elected officials, opposed by all the media, including the Washington Post, to require a unanimous vote of the county council to increase property tax revenue more than the rate of inflation. It passed countywide. It passed in 5 of the 8 legislative districts despite the unanimous opposition of the office holders. And it really stopped cold large property tax increases in Montgomery County for about 8 years. And then the office holders realized, the council members realized, hey, we've got 9 votes. You really can't get through the Democratic primary anymore by calling for spending to be limited. We only had 16% of county Democrats vote in the 2014 Democratic primary here in Montgomery County. And it's a group that votes there that doesn't believe in limiting spending. So now there's a locked-in 9 votes to increase property taxes more than the rate of inflation. We think they can do that at any time. So they've really negated the successful amendment I had in 2008. We need at least 1 or 2 people in the county government now to try to limit spending and keep things on track, because we can't price African Americans, Latinos, women, seniors out of housing here. We can't create a high barrier like they did just recently when they passed a 9% property tax increase and a 30% increase in the real estate transfer tax. We have to give people who are crammed into apartments a chance to move into a home with a backyard where kids can have a soccer goal and play.
So they just recently passed that increase, but then at the same time, you now know that in the current offices they have, they're limited and then after 2 years, they're out of office. How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel wonderful, because I think that the agenda of these tax increase specialists was completely repudiated in November of 2016, because our term limits proposal got 70% of the vote. And I think the reasons people voted for term limits were: 1, this 9% property tax increase; 2, the 30% increase in the real estate transfer tax, which went into effect in September; 3, the self-serving council voted themselves a 30% pay increase; 4, they've done nothing about the 270. I think many citizens, including the ones I was with this morning, are worried about getting parking tickets while they're driving on I-270. And also 5, people are worried about the Manhattanization of parts of Montgomery County, including where we are here in Bethesda and West Bard, etc., without having adequate roads and schools. I mean, in West Bard, they tried to increase the density so much when the schools were already overcrowded.
So you're in favor of responsible development with adequate infrastructure?
No question about it, and we don't have that now.
So, okay, and so you have an interest in, have you ever, and so do you have any other ballot referendums that you have any, maybe coming down the pipe?
Well, there's one that I'm interested in, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to do it for 2018 or 2020 when we have even a larger vote. It's a little worrisome in 2018 where only about half the voters vote. In 2020, everyone's going to vote. And that's to, instead of allowing a unanimous vote to exceed the inflation rate on property tax revenue, maybe we should just say the county should not in any case exceed the charter limit on property taxes, which is the inflation rate on property taxes, because property taxes here are high. There's a high barrier for people to move into a home or a condo or a townhouse, and we need to give individuals the chance to realize the American dream of owning their own home.
So you spoke earlier about, your thoughts about why there may be a county council that is willing to unanimously pass a property tax increase.
Oh, it's locked in.
You mentioned that there is a competitive Democratic primary. How does that play into the composition of the county council?
Well, you see, the problem is that now there's a general belief, and it may be accurate, that unless you win that Democratic primary for county council, you're not going to be elected in the general election, because the Democrats have about 50% of the votes, about a quarter independents, a quarter Republican. And the problem is that they've switched the primary from September, where they used to have about 30-some% of the county Democrats voting in the September primary. They've now changed it to late June, where in 2014 you only had 16% of the Republicans. So you have to take a pretty far left position on the issues and spending in order to win that Democratic primary. And I'm afraid that no one who wants to limit spending is going to come out of that primary for either council or executive. And we're going to perhaps need to have a rule in the charter that regardless of the feelings of the council, you just can't increase property tax revenue more than the rate of inflation, because they're high enough as it is already.
Would you be in favor of open primaries?
Sure.
Yeah, and so would you have any other solutions to make, to open up the election process?
Well, I think they ought to move the primary back to where it was in September, because evidently there was an argument that troops in Afghanistan couldn't get their ballots back in time for the November election. But we're talking about a small number of troops, and there was a remarkable 50% drop-off in participation in that Democratic primary when they moved it from September to June. It really needs to be moved back, so we have a broader representation voting on the candidates in that Democratic primary.
So this recent successful term limit proposal that passed with 70% of the vote, it wasn't your first time trying to get this passed. And of course, you're not remunerated for doing any of these term limit ballot referendums. Why is it that you've been so driven to do it? And can you explain for our listeners a little bit of the process of how you get this on the ballot and what exactly it changed?
Yes. Well, quite frank, you have to get 10,000 valid signatures. The place to get those signatures is at the food stores, because everyone goes and buys their own groceries. There aren't that many that have Peapod or have their groceries delivered. They generally go to the grocery store. Ted Leonce's, everyone. I've met everyone. And quite frankly, I enjoy it so much, meeting the intelligent people of Montgomery County at these stores, talking to them about the issues. And you really learn a lot from other people when you're doing this, because there's an expert on every subject here in Montgomery County. There's a high percentage of people that have advanced degrees. And quite frankly, I've never met anyone that I didn't like doing this, and I've learned a lot from many people just talking to them about the issues and getting a differing point of view. You think that you have all the answers, but when you talk to a Montgomery County voter, you realize that there's a lot to learn from everyone.
So you went through and you got the 10,000. You actually got more than 10,000 signatures.
Well, we got 18,000.
And why is it you wanted that many?
Well, because we wanted to make sure that people who might challenge our signatures challenge the ability of a Montgomery County resident to write their name and address through some technical argument, as they did this time. The county council, actually, the people affected by term limits, financed a lawsuit which sought to strike out the signatures and say we didn't have enough valid signatures, that there weren't 10,000 out of the 18,000 people who knew how to sign their name and address, which is ludicrous, of course. But they filed this frivolous lawsuit. We got it tossed out in the Montgomery County Circuit Courts. So you have to have a few extra signatures.
Right.
And we more than did it. We had 18,000, and I think that by collecting a large number, it shows enthusiasm for the subject at hand. People in Montgomery County clearly wanted a change. That's why they voted in term limits. But even now, if you're really a dedicated public servant, you can serve 12 years in elected office, which is
in the council, and you can serve an unlimited amount of years in the Maryland General Assembly.
Yeah, and we need term limits in the General Assembly too to get some fresh ideas there too, as well as elections when there are openings rather than appointments of people. But the 12 years is plenty of time to get it done. If you can't get it done in 12 years, you're not going to get it done. Then you can step out for a term of 4 years and run back again and serve 12 more years. It's not a lifetime ban. You can serve 3 terms, 3 4-year terms, step out a term, and then run back.
Now, just a technical point of clarification. According to this term limit law, is a current at-large member allowed to run for a 4th term as a district?
No.
Okay, so no member of the Montgomery County Council who is now serving their 3rd or more terms can run for county council for any position in 2018. Is that correct?
That's correct. They can run for county executive, as some of them are. However, after their agenda has been roundly repudiated by 70% of the voters, I don't think that any of the present county council members who are thinking for running for county executive are going to have any chance of being elected to county executive.
Have you ever thought about using this successful referendum to launch yourself into a political campaign?
Oh, sure. I've thought about that, and I've thought that we really need someone in the county government who is interested in controlling spending, bringing in jobs, improving I-270, preventing Manhattanization without proper infrastructure. I've thought about that, and I've lived all my life in Montgomery County and been to almost every home in the county.
Now, incidentally, you did mention something, which was the appointment process for vacancies in the state legislature.
Yes.
Now, incidentally, tonight, though this will air in March, actually tonight, December 7th, you have in District 20 an appointment process to fill the vacancy left by then Senator Jamie Raskin, now Congressman-elect Jamie Raskin. And of course, if one of the individuals selected to be senator is a delegate, then in a few weeks' time you'll have a separate appointment process to fill a District 20 delegate seat. And then just a month ago, we had an appointment process to appoint a state delegate, Craig Zucker, to become a senator. And then you had Pam Queen, who is a delegate from the Central Committee. You have Ulysses Curry, who just retired in Prince George's. He was appointed, and fully, as of this moment, 1 in 3 members of the Montgomery County delegation, the legislature, have at some point in their lives been appointed to either the House or the Senate. What do you think should be done about this, and what do you think about this? Is this right or wrong, or doesn't matter?
I think it's very, very wrong. I think we need direct election of all these legislators. It's happening quite often now, who are being appointed to these seats. And interestingly enough, for instance, in District 15, where we had a state senator and a delegate both appointed, they then ran for election after their appointment, and when they ran, they put in their literature, re-elect us, okay? And they counted being appointed as being elected, but it's not the same. We need to have open elections. Now, I know it's a little costly to run an election, but we can cut the cost by, for instance, when you have a legislative vacancy, having an election by mail. People they get their ballots, they have it certified or notarized, they send it in.
Now, in Oregon, they also have online voting. What do you think about that?
I think that's the wave of the future.
So having online voting and voting by mail could drive down voting costs. And there are frequent elections. In Montgomery County, there are different municipalities that have different elections, and of course we have elections every 2 years in general, because obviously a congressman only represents a district for a 2-year term, and there are primaries. So if you just throw a name on the next ballot, that might also serve.
Well, I think that we've got to be very careful with online voting, because there are also ways to hack perhaps the vote, and I think as long as you had adequate protections, it could be done safely. The legislature, Maryland has a unique legislature. Only Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Maryland, you have both houses of their legislature elected for 4-year terms, and they're all elected for the same 4-year terms. Every other state, other than Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Maryland, elects at least one house of their state legislature every 2 years. So I think there needs to be some staggering there too, as well as term limits for the state legislature and the big boys down in Congress.
So staggered terms. Well, to change the term limits in Congress, you'd need a United States constitutional amendment.
Yes, that's going to be difficult to achieve.
A little bit more than a charter amendment for Montgomery County.
Yeah, it would be difficult to achieve, but gosh, you'd bring in some fresh ideas. You'd bring in, I think...
Would you lose expertise?
You'd lose expertise, but you'd bring in fresh ideas. You know, if you're going to be operated on for a tumor in your brain, you're going to want someone that is who's experienced, but also knows the current advanced technology, who knows all the new advances too. So I think we need a combination of experience and new ideas, and term limits would bring that about.
So as we near the end of this podcast, Robin, I'd like to ask you to reflect upon your varied career in public service. You're in the bar defending individuals who have very few other options, very few allies. You have served in the Maryland House of Delegates. You have run for office and had referendums that now have successfully passed twice to amend the Montgomery County Charter. I wanted to ask you to think about your years in public service and why you've done all this. Why is it that you have worked so hard, especially in a non-remunerated capacity with some of the political endeavors that you've embarked upon? And why have you actually done all this? Why do you feel so passionately about this? Why is public service so important to you?
Well, public service is important because you get to meet the public and talk to the public, and the smartest person is the one who picks the best brains. And there are plenty of very smart people in Montgomery County. So as a consequence, I've actually put over the years, since 1974, about 25 charter amendments on the ballot, and 5 of them have passed. Many got over 45% of the vote, didn't pass, and promoted robust discussion. I think that America is a wonderful country, and the reason it is because we can bring about peaceful change through the electoral and legal process, and that's what I'm all about. Peaceful change, but we must change to move ahead. If we're not moving ahead, we're standing still.
That's Robin Ficker, former delegate from District 15, defense attorney and author of the successful term limit proposal, which received 70% of the vote. Robin has been successful in passing 20% of his charter amendments in Montgomery County and speaks about wanting to move forward with fiscal responsibility. He has a legacy of fiscal notes that continues to be the rule in the Maryland General Assembly, where every bill must continue to have a fiscal note to this day, and leaves a legacy of what he says is fiscal responsibility, and continues to advocate for new measures to ensure that fresh blood and fresh ideas get into the legislature, and that, as he sees it, there's no longer any political stagnation. So, Robin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, and keep on keeping on. I have to admire you for having this show on a periodic basis.
And this has been episode 82 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.